The laugh came first. That it wasn't loud. It wasn't mocking. It was a quiet, involuntary release of disbelief, one short breath that escaped before the man could stop it. A laugh born not from humor, but from the absurdity of what he was hearing. The street was narrow, framed by brick storefronts and parked cars dusted with early evening grime. Red and blue lights washed over everything in slow, rhythmic pulses, turning faces into silhouettes and metal into mirrors. Two rookie police officers stood stiffly in front of him, hands hovering near their belts, shoulders squared with the exaggerated confidence of men trying to look older than their experience. "Step back," one of them said, voice sharp, rehearsed. "Hands where we can see them." The man complied without hesitation. He stepped back, palms open, fingers spread. Calm. Composed. He wore a dark coat, tailored but unremarkable, the kind that blended easily into a crowd. His hair was neatly trimmed. His posture relaxed, almost patient. A few pedestrians had slowed, curiosity pulling them into an uneven half-circle. Phones were already out. Screens glowed. The night had learned how to watch. "Sir," the second officer added, louder now, "you think this is funny?" The man shook his head. "No," he said evenly. "I don't." But the first officer had already decided otherwise. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing, mistaking composure for disrespect. "You laughed," he said. "You think we're a joke?" The man exhaled slowly. He looked past them for a brief second, at the blinking lights, the gathering crowd, the way a simple stop had begun to tilt towards something heavier. When he spoke again, his voice was steady, almost gentle. "I laughed because you're threatening to arrest me for standing on a sidewalk," he said. "That's all." "That was enough." "Turn around," the officer snapped. "Now." "What's the charge?" the man asked. Not defiant. Not raised. "Just a question," the answer came fast and hollow. "Disorderly conduct." The words hung in the air, vague and elastic, stretched to fit whatever the moment required. The second officer reached out, grabbing the man's arm with more force than necessary. The crowd shifted. A woman gasped softly. Someone muttered, "Come on, man." "I haven't done anything," the man said, still calm. "You know that." The laugh came again, shorter this time, quieter. Almost reflexive. And that was when everything tipped. "Cuff him," the first officer ordered. Metal clicked shut around wrists that had never resisted. The man didn't pull away. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at the officer, eyes level, and said, "This is a mistake." The officer scoffed. "You should have thought about that before laughing at us." As they led him toward the patrol car, the crowd's phones followed, recording every step. A teenager whispered, "He didn't even do anything." An older man shook his head slowly. No one intervened. They rarely did. The man was guided, pushed, into the back seat. The door slammed shut, sealing him behind glass and steel. The lights continued their endless rotation, painting his face in alternating red and blue. He sat upright, hands cuffed in front of him, expression unreadable. Inside the car, the silence was heavy. He glanced out the window as one of the officers filled out paperwork on the hood. The other stood nearby, chest puffed, scanning the crowd like a guard protecting a fragile victory. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Life continued, indifferent. The man closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. He looked down at the cuffs, then back up toward the street. There was no anger on his face. No fear. Just a quiet, resigned awareness that this moment, small and unnecessary, was about to become something much larger. Neither officer knew who he was, they didn't know where he worked, or what authority he carried when the robes were on and the courtroom was silent. They didn't know the name that appeared on legal opinions, or the weight his voice held when gavels fell. To them, he was just another man who laughed at the wrong time. The patrol car engine started. As it pulled away from the curb, a phone camera caught one last image through the rear window, the man sitting still, composed, eyes forward, as if already watching the consequences begin to form, and somewhere across town, a police radio crackled. "Chief's on his way," a voice said. "He's not happy." No one in that car understood yet why the air had suddenly changed. The patrol car moved through traffic without urgency, lights still on but siren silent, a slow procession that drew eyes without demanding attention. Inside, the man sat steady as the city slid past in fragments of neon and shadow. Every bump in the road tugged at the cuffs, reminding him of the thin line between dignity and humiliation that had been crossed without cause. Up front, the rookies talked. "Guy's got an attitude," the driver said, shaking his head. "Laughing like he's untouchable." "Yeah," the other replied. "They always think they're smarter than us." The words floated back through the partition, unchallenged. The man didn't respond. He watched reflections ripple across the glass, faces bending and disappearing, strangers unaware they were witnessing the opening scene of a quiet reckoning. At the station, fluorescent lights replaced the strobes. The car rolled into the Sally Port, metal doors grinding shut behind it. The sound echoed, final and enclosing. An officer from inside glanced at the back seat, did a double take, then looked away. He said nothing. The man was led inside, guided by hands that had learned procedure but not judgment. His name was requested, entered, misheard, entered again. The computer beeped. The screen loaded slowly, as if reluctant. "Anything in your pockets?" one rookie asked. "Wallet." "Phone." "Keys," the man answered. They were placed into a plastic tray, slid across a counter already scratched by 1,000 small injustices. A fingerprint scanner blinked. A camera clicked. The man's expression never changed. "What's the charge?" the desk officer asked. "Disorderly," came the reply. The desk officer paused, eyes flicking from the screen to the man's face. A second longer than necessary. Then he nodded and continued typing. The system accepted the explanation without protest. Systems usually did. Down the hall, a holding bench waited. The man sat, cuffs removed, hands resting loosely on his knees. Across from him, another detainee stared openly, confused by the calm. "You okay?" the detainee asked. The man met his eyes. "Yes," he said. "Are you?" The question seemed to unsettle the other man more than any complaint would have. Phones buzzed. Somewhere outside the station, the video was already moving. A short clip. 30 seconds. A laugh. An order. Cuffs closing. The caption simple and incendiary. Views climbed quietly at first, then faster. In the watch commander's office, a radio crackled again. A name was mentioned. A pause followed. Then another voice, lower, tighter. "Say that again." The rookies didn't hear it. They were busy completing forms, reliving the stop with exaggerated confidence, reinforcing each other's certainty. To them, this was routine. A lesson taught. Respect enforced, but routines depend on assumptions, and assumptions were beginning to crack. A sergeant stepped into the processing area, eyes scanning. He stopped when he saw the man on the bench. Recognition flickered, faint but real. He frowned, then checked the screen at the desk. "Who brought him in?" the sergeant asked. The rookies straightened. "We did, sir." "For what?" "Disorderly conduct." "Laughing." "Causing a scene." The sergeant looked again at the man, who met his gaze without challenge. There was no plea there. No explanation offered. Just patience. The sergeant nodded once. "I'll be right back." He walked away faster than he arrived. Minutes passed. The holding area felt smaller. The hum of the lights grew louder. The man shifted slightly, adjusting his posture, not to ease discomfort but to remain present. He understood escalation. He had seen it from the bench, from the other side, when small decisions hardened into institutional failures. Another officer whispered to the desk clerk. The desk clerk's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The sergeant returned, this time with his phone in hand. "Chief's coming down," he said quietly. The words landed differently now. The rookies exchanged glances, confidence dimming, replaced by a thin edge of uncertainty. For this, one asked. The sergeant didn't answer. I in the holding area, the man finally spoke again, his voice low but clear. You might want to slow things down, he said. Before they speed up on you. No one responded. But several people listened. Outside, tires screeched as a vehicle pulled in too fast. Doors opened. Voices rose. Footsteps approached with purpose. The night, which had begun with a laugh, was tightening into something far less forgiving. Inside the station, posture changed. Radios were turned down. Conversations shortened. Eyes followed the hallway toward the entrance. The air carried the subtle shift that came when rank approached. One rookie laughed once, nervously, then stopped. He checked his belt, straightened his shoulders, and reread the report, searching for firmness where there had been none. The other rookie watched the bench, studying the man's stillness. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defiance. It was familiarity, as if he had been here before, though not like this. The desk officer cleared his throat. Do we need to notify anyone? He asked. The question hung unanswered. The sergeant returned, face set, eyes sharper. Stand by, he said. A door opened hard. The sound cut through the room. The rookies turned in unison, heavy footsteps crossed the floor. A voice carried authority without volume. Where is he? No one pointed. They didn't need to. The bench answered for them. The man rose calmly, not because he was told, but because it was time. The room seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere, a phone vibrated. Somewhere, the video crossed another threshold. This was still escalation, still movement toward collision, and no one yet understood how far it would go. The chief's presence pressed in before he fully entered, a gravity that bent posture and thinned excuses. The rookies felt it in their chests, the weight of something irreversible arriving. The man stood waiting, eyes forward, composed, allowing the machinery of authority to finish building its own momentum, because once it peaked, there would be no quiet way back, only consequences, unfolding slowly, under lights that never forgot, and witnesses who did not look away. The chief entered without ceremony. No raised voice. No dramatic pause. Just a controlled stride that cut through the station like a blade through fabric. Conversations died mid-sentence. Chairs straightened. Screens were minimized. Authority did not announce itself, it arrived and rearranged the room. Who authorized this arrest? The chief asked. The question wasn't loud, but it carried. It demanded an answer from the room itself. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one rookie stepped forward, the confidence from earlier now replaced by rigid formality. We did, sir, he said. Subject was being disruptive. The chief's eyes shifted to the man standing near the bench. Took him in fully now. The tailored coat. The calm posture. The expression that wasn't pleading or hostile, just observant, disruptive. How? The chief asked. He laughed. The rookie said. When we gave lawful orders. A pause followed. Not confusion. Evaluation. Laughing is not a crime, the chief said. The rookie swallowed. He was escalating the situation. The chief turned slightly, glancing at the sergeant. Body cam on? Yes, sir. Pull it. A screen lit up. The footage rolled. The sidewalk. The lights. The short, quiet laugh. The question about the charge. The cuffs. No shouting. No resistance. No threat. The room watched itself fail in real time. The rookie shifted his weight. He didn't respect our authority. The chief's head turned slowly. Authority is not respected by force, he said. It's respected by conduct. The words settled heavily. But the damage was already done. Who processed him? The chief asked. The desk officer raised a hand slightly. I did, sir. Charge? Disorderly conduct. Specific behavior? The desk officer hesitated. Laughing. Allegedly. The chief nodded once. So we arrested a man for laughing. No one contradicted him. Did either of you attempt de-escalation? The chief asked the rookies. Yes, sir, one replied too quickly. We told him to step back. And when he did, the chief pressed silence. Phones buzzed again. Someone's radio chirped, then went quiet. The chief turned to the sergeant. How long has he been here? 23 minutes, sir. The chief looked at the man again. You injured? No, the man replied. Threatened? No, disrespected? The man considered the word. That depends on how it's defined. A flicker of something, recognition, perhaps, passed through the chief's eyes. The rookie spoke again, defensively now. Sir, we were maintaining order. The chief didn't look at him. Order is not silence, he said. And it is not obedience without cause. He turned back to the desk. Release him. The rookie stiffened. Sir, now, the chief said. The desk officer moved quickly, hands shaking slightly as he reversed entries, corrected records. The system that had accepted the charge without protest now erased it just as quietly, but erasure does not undo misused. As the man's property was returned, the chief noticed something else. A phone on the counter, screen lit, paused on a video frame from outside. The moment of the cuffs closing. How many views? The chief asked. The desk officer glanced. Just past 80,000. The room tightened. Comments? The chief asked. The officer hesitated. Then turned the screen. Words scrolled faster than they could be read. Outrage. Disbelief. Names being guessed. Context demanded. Accountability demanded. The chief closed his eyes briefly. Then opened them. Who contacted legal? He asked. No one yet, sir. Why not? The sergeant answered carefully. We were waiting. For what? For confirmation, he said. The chief nodded. You have it now. He turned back to the rookies. You made an arrest without probable cause, he said. You escalated a non-event into a violation of civil rights. We followed procedure, one rookie said weakly. The chief stepped closer. Procedure is not protection when it's misused. The man spoke again, calmly, clearly. Chief, he said. If I may. The chief turned fully toward him now. Go ahead. I don't believe this was malice, the man said. I believe it was habit. The room froze. The chief studied him. Go on. Habit, the man continued, of equating authority with compliance. Of mistaking calm for contempt. Of believing escalation is control. The rookies stared. The words landed harder than any reprimand. The chief exhaled slowly. What's your name, sir? The man answered. The chief's face changed, not dramatically. Not theatrically. Just enough. Enough to register recognition. Enough to recalibrate. The chief took a step back. His voice lowered. Judge, he said quietly. The word moved through the room like a current. The rookies went pale. No one spoke. The man nodded once. Yes. The chief closed his eyes again, longer this time. When he opened them, the authority in the room had shifted, not disappeared, but reoriented. This, the chief said, turning to everyone, is why assumptions are dangerous. He looked back at the rookies. You didn't just arrest a citizen. You arrested the judiciary. One rookie opened his mouth, then closed it. The other stared at the floor. The chief straightened. This is no longer a simple misconduct review, he said. This is an institutional failure. He turned to the sergeant. Secure all footage. Body cams. Station cameras. Dispatch logs. Yes, sir. Contact internal affairs. The words landed with finality. The man remained still, watching. He had not raised his voice. He had not demanded respect. He had allowed the system to expose itself using its own rules. Authority had misused its power. And now, under its own weight, it was beginning to collapse inward. Outside, the video crossed 1 million views. Inside, the consequences were just beginning. The room did not recover quickly from the word judge. It lingered in the air, heavier than sirens, heavier than rank. It reframed everything that had happened in the last hour, pulling meaning out of moments that had seemed small and exposing them as reckless. The chief adjusted his stance, not in submission, but in recalibration. Authority, when intelligent, knows when to correct itself. Sir, he said, voice controlled, on behalf of this department, I apologize. The man inclined his head slightly. He did not accept or reject the apology. He simply acknowledged its presence. That apology, the man replied, is not for me alone. The chief nodded. He understood immediately. The rookies stood frozen, no longer officers in control of a situation, but participants inside one they could not escape. Their earlier confidence now looked fragile, theatrical. Their uniforms felt heavier. Judge, the chief said again, you are free to leave. Transportation can be arranged if, I'll walk, the man said. He turned toward the exit, not hurried, not triumphant. As he moved, people stepped aside instinctively. Not because of fear. Because recognition had finally arrived. Halfway to the door, he stopped. He turned back, calmly, deliberately, ensuring every word would land where it needed to. I was laughing, he said, because I've presided over cases exactly like this. Silence tightened. I've listened to reports written after the fact, he continued. I've watched videos played back without sound, without context. I've seen how easily a narrative can be constructed when authority is unchecked. The rookies felt the words press against them, stripping away excuses they hadn't yet spoken. I laughed, the man said, because I knew how this would look on paper. And because I knew how long it would take to fix. The chief's jaw tightened. The man turned his attention to the rookies for the first time directly. His gaze was steady, not condemning, but precise. You didn't recognize me, he said. And that's the point. You shouldn't have needed to. He paused. Every person you encounter deserves the same restraint you would have shown if you had known. No one interrupted. No one could. The chief stepped forward again, reclaiming the room with a different kind of authority now, one tempered by consequence. These officers are relieved of duty effective immediately, he said. Pending full investigation. The rookies stiffened as if struck. One inhaled sharply. The other's hands trembled at his sides. Sir, one began. The chief raised a hand. This is not a debate. He turned to the sergeant. Escort them out. Collect badges and firearms. The sound of Velcro ripping as badges were removed was small, but devastating. Metal clinked against the counter. Sidearms were placed down, no longer extensions of power, just objects. Phones came out again. Someone filmed discreetly. Someone else stopped pretending not to watch. The man observed quietly as the reversal completed itself. No smile. No satisfaction. Only confirmation. As the rookies were led away, the chief addressed the room. Let this be clear, he said. Authority does not protect you when you misuse it. It exposes you. He turned to the man once more. Judge, Internal Affairs will contact you directly. Any accommodation? The man raised a hand gently. I don't require accommodation, he said. I require accuracy. The chief nodded. You'll have it. The man resumed walking. At the door, he paused again, hand on the handle. Chief, he said without turning. That video, yes, the chief said. We're aware. Good, the man replied. Then you know this isn't contained anymore. The chief didn't deny it. Outside, the night air felt different. Cooler. Cleaner. The street was quieter now, but the digital world was loud. Notifications stacked. Headlines formed. Speculation hardened into outrage. The man stepped onto the sidewalk where it had begun. The spot where he had stood. Where he had laughed. A few people recognized him now. Whispers followed. He acknowledged none of it. He walked on, coat moving gently with each step, disappearing into the city that had briefly tried to reduce him to a charge. Inside the station, the chief remained still for a long moment after the door closed. "Get ahead of this," he said finally. "Not with statements. With facts." "Yes, sir," the sergeant replied, "and make sure," the chief added, "that whatever reforms come from this don't use his name as a shield." The room absorbed the instruction. Power had revealed itself, not in volume or force, but in restraint. In the quiet certainty of someone who did not need to announce who he was to be treated fairly, the system had pulled too hard on its own authority, and in doing so, had exposed exactly where it was weakest. By morning, the video was everywhere. It played silently on office monitors, on phones at kitchen tables, on gym treadmills and commuter trains. The same 30 seconds, over and over, 2 officers, a laugh, cuffs closing. Context filled the comments where the footage stayed mute. Assumptions hardened into questions, then sharpened into demands. By noon, the man's name was known, not blasted at first. Not sensationalized. Just stated. Followed by a pause that carried its own weight. A sitting judge. Criminal court. A man whose job was to decide whether arrests like this stood or collapsed. The irony did not go unnoticed. The department released a statement early, brief and measured. An arrest was made in error. The individual has been released. An internal investigation is underway. No names. No defensiveness. It was the correct tone, and entirely insufficient. Requests flooded in. Media. Civil rights groups. City council offices. The mayor's chief of staff. Each call carried a different urgency, but the same underlying message: this would not disappear. Inside the department, the consequences began quietly, where they always did. The rookies were separated immediately. Different schedules. Different entrances. Their lockers sealed. Their access cards deactivated. They were told not to speak to anyone, not each other, not the media, not friends in uniform. Silence was no longer a choice, it was an order. Internal affairs moved with methodical precision. Footage was pulled. Dispatch audio reviewed. Reports compared line by line against timestamps. The arrest narrative was laid beside the video and found wanting. Disorderly conduct, it turned out, had no disorder. The body cam audio captured the laugh clearly now, short, restrained, almost embarrassed. The escalation followed without provocation. Commands layered onto compliance. Authority asserting itself because it could. The investigation memo used careful language, but its meaning was unmistakable. No probable cause established. At City Hall, the Police Oversight Committee scheduled an emergency session. It was framed as a review, but everyone understood it was a reckoning. The chair requested attendance from the chief, the internal affairs commander, and legal counsel. The chief arrived early, documents in hand. He did not attempt to soften what would be presented. He had learned, painfully, that credibility survived only when truth arrived first. Across town, the judge sat in chambers, robe folded neatly over a chair. He declined interviews. Declined commentary. When colleagues reached out, he answered briefly, professionally. "I'm fine," he said. Let the process work. But the process had learned something new. This time, the spotlight was not leaving. The rookies were called in separately. Their union representatives sat beside them, hands folded, expressions neutral. Each officer told the same story, rehearsed and fragile. Each account leaned on the same justification: perceived disrespect, officer safety, escalating demeanor, and each account fractured under evidence. Point to the moment, the investigator asked, where you believed a crime occurred. Silence followed. Point. One officer gestured vaguely. His tone. Tone is not a statute, the investigator replied. The other officer shifted. He laughed. Yes, the investigator said. He did. The interviews ended without raised voices. They didn't need to be dramatic. The facts were heavy enough. Within days, the district attorney's office announced it would review the arrest for potential civil rights violations. The wording was precise, but the signal was clear: this was no longer internal. The city's risk management office prepared for litigation. They ran numbers. They reviewed precedent. They understood exposure when they saw it. Community meetings filled quickly. Not with shouting, but with fatigue. Residents spoke calmly about stops that escalated without cause. About laughter misread as threat. About dignity treated as defiance. The judge did not attend. He did not need to. His presence lingered in every testimony. On the fifth day, the department announced disciplinary findings. Both rookies had violated policy on probable cause, de-escalation, and conduct unbecoming. Their suspensions were converted to terminations pending final review. The union filed an appeal automatically, a procedural reflex, but even its language lacked conviction. The chief stood before cameras again. "This is not about who was arrested," he said. "It's about how." Questions followed, about training, about culture, about accountability. The chief answered each without evasion. He acknowledged failure without dramatizing it. He committed to reform without promising miracles. Behind him, the department crest looked older than it had the week before. The officers' names were released quietly, as policy required. The internet found them anyway. Not with doxing. Not with threats. With scrutiny. Their past stops examined. Patterns suggested. Stories compared. None of it was comfortable. In a separate announcement, the city confirmed a civil settlement was under discussion. The amount was undisclosed, but the acknowledgement itself spoke volumes. Through it all, the judge remained absent from the noise. When asked, he said only this: "I want the record to reflect what happened." The consequence was not revenge. It was exposure. It was the slow dismantling of a narrative that had protected misuse for too long. It was the realization, spreading through the department, that routine could no longer hide behind ambiguity. In roll calls, supervisors spoke differently now. They emphasized articulation. They emphasized restraint. Not because of the judge, but because of the video. The rookies' lockers were cleared. Their names removed from schedules. Their careers ended not with scandal, but with documentation. In a memo circulated department-wide, the chief wrote, "Authority is not a shield. It is a responsibility." The city council passed a resolution calling for external review of disorderly conduct arrests. It passed unanimously. The consequence phase did not conclude with a single moment. It unfolded steadily, relentlessly, reshaping careers, policies, and expectations. And in courtrooms across the city, defense attorneys began citing the case, not as an outlier, but as evidence. The system, having been forced to look at itself, could no longer pretend it liked what it saw. Reform did not arrive with speeches or banners. It arrived in documents, schedules, and quiet changes that were harder to film but impossible to ignore. 2 weeks after the arrest, the department issued a directive revising the definition and application of disorderly conduct. The language was tightened. Ambiguity removed. Laughing, questioning, tone, explicitly excluded as grounds for arrest. Supervisors were required to sign off on any such charge within 24 hours, with body cam footage attached. It was not symbolic. It was structural. Training schedules shifted next. De-escalation modules were expanded, no longer treated as add-ons but as prerequisites. Scenarios were rewritten to mirror what had happened on that sidewalk: calm civilians, no threats, no resistance. Officers were evaluated not on control, but on restraint. Those who failed did not advance. The academy, instructors stopped glossing over discretion. They slowed down. They replayed the video, not the viral clip, but the full footage. They paused at the laugh. At the question. At the moment where nothing required force. "This," an instructor said, tapping the screen, "is where careers end." No one laughed. The oversight committee released its findings publicly. It acknowledged that the arrest was lawful only on paper, and unjustifiable in practice. It cited culture over policy. Habit over judgment. It recommended independent review for citizen complaints involving subjective charges. The city adopted the recommendations without amendment. Internal affairs procedures were adjusted. Complaints tied to viral footage were no longer fast-tracked quietly, they were reviewed with external observers present. Transparency became policy, not damage control. The chief testified again, this time before the city council. He spoke plainly. We trained compliance, he said. We neglected comprehension. The council approved funding for scenario-based legal training led jointly by prosecutors and defense attorneys. Officers would hear both sides of the courtroom before ever stepping into one. Across town, the judge reviewed the reforms from his chambers. He did not comment publicly. He sent a single letter instead, formal, precise, addressed to the chief. Reform is measured not by intent, but by consistency. The chief pinned it to his board. Months passed. Arrest data shifted. Disorderly conduct charges dropped sharply. Not because crime vanished, but because discretion returned. Supervisors noticed fewer confrontations. Fewer complaints. Fewer reports written defensively. The culture adjusted slowly, the way large systems always did, resistant at first, then quietly compliant, then unfamiliar with the old ways. New officers learned early that authority was conditional. That cameras were not enemies. That calm was not contempt. The video faded from feeds, replaced by newer outrages, newer stories. But inside the department, it remained a reference point, spoken of without names. Remember that case, someone would say, and everyone knew which one. Reform did not erase what happened. It absorbed it, reshaped around it, and moved forward with less tolerance for the shortcuts that had once felt normal. The system had been embarrassed into improvement, and for the first time in a long while, that improvement held. The sidewalk looked ordinary again. No lights. No crowd. No cameras angled just right to catch a moment becoming evidence. People passed through it every day without knowing what had unfolded there, or how close it came to being forgotten. That was how these stories usually ended, but this one didn't. In chambers, the judge resumed his work. Cases moved forward. Motions were heard. Arrests were reviewed with the same quiet scrutiny as always. But something had shifted, not in his authority, but in how it was understood. He never mentioned the arrest from the bench. He didn't need to. His presence carried its own reminder now, that the law watched itself, and sometimes found fault. Across the city, officers approached encounters differently. Not dramatically. Not performatively. Just with a pause where there hadn't been one before. A question instead of a command. Space instead of pressure, not because a judge had been arrested, because a man had laughed, and the system had failed to justify why that mattered. The rookies faded from memory, their names absorbed into paperwork and precedent. Their story was no longer about them. It had become a cautionary reference, passed down quietly, stripped of ego and excuse. Power, when left unchecked, reveals its weakest moments in the smallest actions. A laugh, a question, a refusal to be humiliated. Justice did not arrive with punishment alone. It arrived with correction. With acknowledgement. With rules rewritten so the next person would not need a title to be treated fairly. The story spread not because of outrage, but because of recognition. People saw themselves in that quiet laugh. In that calm refusal to escalate. In the realization that dignity should never require credentials, and the system, slow, resistant, imperfect, responded in the only way that mattered. It changed, not everywhere. Not forever. But enough to prove that exposure still worked. That accountability still had weight. That authority could be forced to answer to its own standards. This was not a story about a judge. It was a story about what happens when power meets restraint, and loses. If moments like this matter to you, if accountability should be the rule and not the exception, then remember this one. Share it. Talk about it. Expect better because you've seen what happens when better is demanded calmly, intelligently, and without violence. Justice doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it just waits long enough for the truth to speak.